Hi guys, it's Sophie. So today we're going to be doing a review of The Crow Girl by Erik Sunopsis. So before we get started into the specifics, I'm going to do a sort of non-spoilery overview to begin with, but be aware that there will be spoilers. I will mark them up before we go into that section. So the basic synopsis is that the body of a murdered boy shows up and he's been very brutally murdered. It looks like he's been mummified, and we follow the story of Jeanette, who is the main sort of police officer investigating the case, and a woman called Sophia, who's sort of clinical psychologist who at stages helps her sort of profile the killers and understand why they've chosen the victims they have. There's also the added element of the fact that this boy is an immigrant and therefore there's not really all that much in terms of resource that's been given to the case. They're sort of struggling against that as well. Okay, so at the outset, this sounds like just the kind of thing that I would normally enjoy. It sounds as though it's kind of dark, kind of twisted, and might have some interesting elements. I really like the fact that there was the sort of psychology to it as well. Unfortunately, this book completely and utterly let me down. I didn't enjoy it at all. I only gave it 1 star, which is really rare for me. So again, on the theme of sort of non-spoilers, we'll start with the writing. The writing is incredibly lazy, and we'll go into a little bit more about that in the spoiler section. But I had no sense that the authors had an overarching storyline in mind when they were writing. It felt very much as though they were just picking things up as they wanted to and dropping them off when it didn't suit. There wasn't really any eloquence to the prose. The dialogue was okay, but yeah, writing wise I just didn't really find anything there for me. There's a big problem with telling rather than showing with the character development, so they insisted on writing probably 5 or 6 times how hard it was for Jeanette to be a female police officer. And at no point did they really show her having any detriment from having been a police officer. They didn't really, other than her own sort of perception of what characters were saying or doing, didn't really have anything that meant that her life was particularly hard or any proof that it was because she was a female. Given what we know in the storyline as we progress on, as I say, spoilers, that'll come later. I don't think she's a good police officer. I think they have legitimate reason for doubting her professional capability that is beyond the fact that she's female. That's just one example. There are other times where they are just pressing points on you really hard. I felt it assumed that I wasn't picking up on things as a reader, and I found that really frustrating. Characters, I thought all of the characters were one-dimensional and poorly developed. Almost every single one. Hertig, I think how you say it, is probably the only character that I felt any vague sense of being a real human, and even then he became faintly ridiculous at points. So I didn't think the characters were well done at all. So the author, Erik Sunopsis, is actually the pen name for a duo. It's these 2 men here, who are called Jerker Eriksson and Hakan Alexander Sundqvist. And while we're talking about things that didn't work, because that's got what the majority of this video is going to be, they didn't communicate as a pair of writers. One thing that really irritated me throughout the entire book is clearly one of the 2 authors, I don't know which one of them it is, but clearly one of the 2 of them smokes and the other one doesn't. And throughout the book I got so frustrated because all of the characters would just pick up a cigarette, all of them would be smoking, you know, fairly fluidly and all over the place. And then you'd have 4 or 5 chapters where they wouldn't smoke at all, even in stressful situations, which indicates the other one doesn't smoke. And the pair of them just haven't spoken about that. They haven't gone over the notes. They haven't seen what the other one's writing about. And it's so frustrating. It just feels as though it's been really hastily edited and that the communication between the pair of them just wasn't there. There are other aspects too in terms of slight writing style differences, but that I can pass. It's the characters that irritates me when they can't have consistent characters, because that's so important, especially when you have a duo, that you have to understand the characters and their traits. And that one thing was just sort of emblematic of my issue with the character differences and the way that they're perceiving issues. Okay, so now I've gone over my surface level dislikes. We are going to go into some spoiler territory now. So if, despite what I've said, you still really want to read this book, then I would suggest that you go away right now. Okay, so for those of you who are sufficiently put off or intrigued by the review, I suppose, we're going to go into some spoiler territory now. So if you've read this book or you know a little bit about this book, you'll know that one of the main themes as we go through is that of, potentially trigger warning, rape, incest, paedophilia. And that is paired with mental illness. The majority of the mental illness mentioned is DID, or dissociative identity disorder, and borderline personality disorder, BPD. There's also hints of psychosis added in there, but in general it's just a plethora of dissociative disorders. The portrayal of mental illness in this book was absolutely appalling, and that was what broke it to the point where I was looking for other things that were going to piss me off too, because that happens sometimes when I get annoyed with something. I'll look for all the faults because I may as well do this well. Mental illness was used in this book as a vehicle. It wasn't used as any kind of health condition, it wasn't used as an accompanying part of someone's life. Mental health was a plot device only in this book. So we deal with characters who have many multiple personalities, who are used to further the plot. They are picked up, they add in new multiple personalities when the story's getting a bit slow and they just think maybe we could flesh it out with someone else, and they're completely disposable as soon as that slow part of the storyline is ended. Then they will just drop the character off, essentially leading the reader through these odd sort of dead-end rabbit warrens of storyline, because actually it's got no impact on any of the plot whatsoever. The whole of this book implies, and regardless of how the ending wraps up to some extent, implies that mental illness is synonymous with violence. And that is one of my biggest bugbears, and it doesn't need to be that way. There are books that do mental illness and violence well. I read a lot of them. If you've been here for a while, then you know that that's kind of my thing, is darker literature, and often that does have elements of people who are unwell mixed in. This wasn't that. This was just them manipulating and using multiple personalities as a plot device, and using the experience of an abused person and the sort of issues with memory that they might have, issues of dissociation, as the premise for this really badly thought out serial killer-ish plot. When they get to the point of the actual perpetrators, the men and sort of negligent women who've been allowing child abuse to go on throughout the novel, they completely and utterly glide over any of their history, any of their mental history whatsoever. It's only the people who have been abused and raped for years who get a really nice examination of how poor their mental health is. It irritates me so much because, do you know what, there are people out there, and I've met people, I know an abnormal quantity of people who have been abused as children who are absolutely fine and they don't go out and they don't hurt anyone. And this didn't have any room for that really. It was just that the image of the person who is mentally unwell, the image of the rape survivor as a broken individual, and I can't stand that. I just can't. People who are raped are whole people. They aren't necessarily good people, they aren't necessarily strong people, but they are whole people. They might be an arsehole. You can be an arsehole and be abused. Perfectly possible. But they are people, and this wasn't portrayed as such. This was rape and abuse as the sole defining factor of a character trait, and thus the sole defining factor of this novel. There's also a lesbian theme running through this book, and actually I have less of an issue with this. I feel as though they were trying quite hard to sort of make it inclusive, make it a bit different. My issue is that it's a completely stereotypical view of what a lesbian relationship might look like, and even to the point where we have the tall, thin, elegant blonde and the petite, hard, very mannish sort of brunette. And that irritates me to some extent because it's just so textbook, and whilst I'm sure there are women out there who have that kind of relationship, cookie cutter sort of expectations of the LGBT community, I don't think are particularly helpful. So I'm giving them some props because I think they were trying to do it well, and I don't think they were trying to just go to the tropes, but it still irritated me, I'm sorry. Whilst we're on LGBTQ, it's worth mentioning that the main sort of motivation for these murders in the end is transsexuality. So, you know, if you're going to look for issues in this book, then maybe you'd find that as one. Through a ridiculously convoluted set of circumstances, this individual decides that they are going to change their gender for a reason, not that they're sort of unhappy with their gender identity, but other reasons, and is so angry that they've changed their gender identity and are unable to cope with it that they act out in a sexual fashion against those who have whole genders. Again, not all that bad as a concept. I can imagine this might be done well, potentially. It was done very poorly, and there was no explanation. I explained it better, I think, just then, than I did in this entire book. It felt as though they were just saying, transsexuals are violent, and transsexuals are ill, and that pissed me off so much as well. Just so much about this book irritated me immensely. And now we're going to get to the last point. It's by no means the last issue I had with this book, but I'm not going to go through every single one of them because we don't have all day. And that is the violence. So You guys know I read violent books. I enjoyed, as much as one can, Lolita and American Psycho. I don't have an issue with hard portrayals of childhood sexual abuse. I read A Little Life and I actually really enjoyed it. This, however, is what I would call masturbatory violence. So there is no purpose or rhyme or reason to the violence, bar fulfilling the author's own sort of pleasure, bar boosting the sales of the book. There is no driver to the storyline, no message behind it. It is just violence for violence sake. As a reader, you're reading quite graphic depictions of childhood sexual abuse, and I would think it would probably be quite triggering. It personally wasn't for myself, my experiences are slightly different to that, but I imagine it could be quite triggering. And again, that was kind of somewhat relevant to the story. I don't think it was done well, I don't think it was written well, but I can pass on that to some extent. But what they decided to do other than that was just add in anything else they could that was horrific. So they were like, yeah, do you know what, the Holocaust has nothing to do with this story, let's put the Holocaust in there. Or the Holodomor, yeah, that's really relevant to the story that's happening in contemporary Stockholm. They packed it full of high-end violent activities that happen and explained it in the sort of grotesque detail that you can imagine. It's only shock value, it doesn't have any underlying value at all. There was a line in here that I felt was oddly placed, because it isn't something that I would necessarily have said about the book otherwise, but seeing as they've written it themselves, I feel as though I can bring it up. They mentioned that individuals might be writing things like thrillers in order to have an outlet for otherwise unhelpful emotions. And that said, it just kind of raises that question. You know, I'm not implying that the authors are sort of criminal in any way, or necessarily that they are suffering from these things, or having any kind of fantasies or whatever, but I wonder why they put it in the book. Because to me it sort of shows, not that they have these issues, but that there's really no reason for it, that the only reason they can think to write such an awful thing would be that people have it in their heads. I imagine that this started as somewhat a way to see how far they could push the thriller and the violence, and they did so without worrying about the craft of writing and about the enjoyment of the reader, or anything like plot, characters, development, any of those things. So that has been my rant. That's probably been the most irritated I think I've been with a book on camera before. So hopefully that has been of some use to you. In summary, I wouldn't buy the book. And I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. I have thought quite carefully since having finished it if there's a group of people I think might enjoy this book. To be honest, personally, I can't think of a group I'd recommend it to. If you're still intrigued and it just sounds your cup of tea, then please tell me what it is that you find interesting. If you have read it and you have enjoyed it, I would love to hear your thoughts too, because for me it was just so packed full of issues I couldn't get through to it. I couldn't get any enjoyment from the story at all. I hope you're well, and that your reading hasn't irritated you quite as much as The Crow Girl irritated me. I'll see you soon in my next video, which I think, fingers crossed, will be my July book haul. Bye bye. This book is dense, it's heavy, it's complicated, and I absolutely love it so far.